Thanks all. And without further ado, our leader, Curt Collier.
Hey, and you play a mean zucchini. Very, very nice. Wow. When I said have fun, I didn't mean go crazy, but yeah. Let's just do that, okay? Let's make that the whole thing. I want to talk a little bit about this book, but also not this book. And I want to have a discussion with y'all about your memories of cooking and things like that. So this is going to be an interactive discussion, and I hope you could participate. Now, I asked Diana to help. Diana, do you mind helping me for a second? And Marinka, since you're new to here, but in a long time, do you mind helping? Would you be okay with that? You know, I figured I'm going to introduce you.
I don't cook, so.
Perfect. Neither did Betty Crocker. In fact, Betty Crocker didn't really know how to cook, the woman who they hired to play the role, yeah.
So it's a good role for me.
That's a very good role for you, yes, right. So I take, I'm an OSHA instructor, so we take food safety very important. So we do have some, here, why don't you put that on? Oops, so sorry.
I'm going to go wash my hands.
Go wash your hands because you're actually touching food. Okay. You'll be touching with a spoon, so I think we're okay. And we're going to do that. How many of you owned a Betty Crocker cookbook? Just a couple of people? Did you ever own a Betty Crocker cookbook? Yeah, it was probably more of a Southern thing, maybe. I don't know. It also had to do with certain culinary traditions. Obviously, if you're from a big Italian family, right? You're probably, yeah. Or Jewish, maybe, yeah, they probably had other things that they would have cooked and things like that. But for a lot of American, of course, this cookbook played a major role. And I'll make sure you can still hear me okay. Yeah, very good. I'm waiting for Diane to come back from washing her hands. Betty Crocker cookbook originally came out in 1921, the Gold Medal Flour Company, if you remember Gold Medal Flour. It used to have billboards all over town. You can still see them fading on buildings. Even in New York City, I've seen Gold Medal, where they've kind of let them fade into the distance. Was created because they had a contest, and if you could solve this little puzzle, you got a free bag of flour. And a lot of people, of course, sent in all this stuff to the contest. But a lot of them asked questions like, how do we bake, and what do we do, and how do we mix ingredients? And so General Mills eventually decided to create a cookbook. Now, Crocker was just the name of a favorite director, and they liked the name Betty because that just sounded sweet, right? So that's why they came up with Betty Crocker. Betty Crocker was not a real person at all. It was a manufactured type of thing. And they used to have a radio program. Now, probably you're all too young for that. Betty Crocker on the radio, anyone? How about Betty Crocker TV show? Did anyone see that? So Betty Crocker actually eventually went onto television. And the reason it became one of the first kind of cooking shows that was popular on TV, a regular type of thing. And NBC promoted through Gold Medal Flour the support. And so NBC had just gotten started, and they decided to have something to boost the audience. And they brought on a woman named Adelaide Howley, eventually Adelaide Howley Cummings, to play Betty Crocker. And she would teach people to cook. She did not know how to cook herself. So there you go, you're in good company. Okay. What she did is she basically just kind of had pre-made recipes like a lot of these cooking shows. You see them any morning. Does anyone remember The Joy of Cooking? You watch that television show? Right. Look at you. That's right. You have that book. Much more different audience, right? Those were different type of taste than this kind of middle America type of thing, especially when a lot of the ingredients that included, like in Betty Crocker, like lobster, you would not have found lobster in Texas. We would not, it's not from Texas. It's not, we don't cook with lobster. We don't eat lobster like that. It's a very kind of unique kind of thing. So,
Gotta live in Maine.
Gotta live in Maine, right? Or at least in the Northeast where you actually have cold enough water for lobster. So because I take health seriously, I thought we'd wear hairnets. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
I couldn't find true hairnets. So I did find something though that may work. I think that can work for you. Here, this is for you. Because, yes, well, oh, There we go. Now, just to keep the hair out of the food, I think that's important, right? That. Yes, of course. Yes, right. Because this is also about a collection of recipes that happen around a bookshop. So my mother would cook from this book quite a bit. My mother was 16 years old when she got married, did not even know how to do much cooking other than a few basic foods. There we go. That's right. Yes, look, we look natural, right? So it makes sense. We're talking about a beauty shop that we would maybe have women standing around in curly. I think so, right? I need more hair, better than the gray. So what's interesting is that my mother didn't know how to cook in 1952, when she got married, she was 16 years of age. Her mother didn't even come to her own wedding because they were so upset that their daughter was getting married at such a young age. However, then the following year when this cookbook came out, my mother, her mother, my grandmother, brought her this cookbook to help her learn to cook. Now, this was in California, believe it or not. Yeah. And she learned to cook from this because what was great about the Betty Crocker cookbook is it had pictures into it. So while we're doing this, while I'm talking, maybe I'll have you do something. I'm going to have you do some, I thought you'd do some South Texas stuff, all right? So this all is kind of stuff from South Texas. And Eric, I'm going to have you hand these out. Now, the first thing I need you to do is you're going to cut the lime in half and juice it and juice half the lime there. The lemon and the lime, yes. And you're going to start yum yum cookies. You got to start somewhere. Now it's really important. There we go. What I have, I need one. Yes, what I have Marinka doing is she is juicing. You ever use a juicer? What is? They don't have this in where you're from. You kind of twist it, right? There you go. They haven't invented that yet, or you have modern appliances probably. Yeah, so she's juicing a lime. If you follow Yum Yum Cookies, you could see what our other cook is doing over here, which is the graham crackers. Now, what's interesting about this is my mother moved into Hondo, Texas. Our family moved into Hondo, Texas. Now, Hondo was most famous because it was robbed twice by a gang of bandits. That's its claim to fame. It was this very, very small ranching community, farming, and then, yeah, a little bit of that, yeah. And then, yeah, no, half of that, yeah, let's go all the way. Now, yes, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, that's 4. That's 4. Yeah, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh. Yeah, so you need to put 24, yeah. 24 little ones. Yes, that's correct. You could just keep them together, but make sure there's 24 in that Ziploc bag I thought for you. There we go. So she's actually preparing, if you look on the recipe, something called Yum Yum Christmas balls. Marinka is just making another South Texas favorite, which we'll go into in a second, as she's just juicing a lime. So Hondo, Texas was a pretty small place until World War II. And what's interesting about World War II is the military moved in and put an air-based training center there. 14,000 military personnel eventually moved into this town of 2,000 or 3,000 people. Right, it was quite the shock to them. They built a huge air base nearby. All these young people moved in, and you can imagine that probably changed the character of Hondo, Texas, quite drastically. In fact, the city just eventually put up a big, gigantic sign in the middle of town, which remains there to this day. This is God's country. Don't drive through it like hell. That is the welcome sign for Hondo, Texas. And I've written about that before. Very, very good. Now, can you take a cup of sugar? And look, this has metric, but if you look, here's what cups are. Yeah. There you go. So let's put a cup of sugar and then kind of, you could do a little less than that. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Now, what's great about, I buy lots of different kinds of healthy types of things in cans because they're great for smashing chips and cookies with that. So that's perfect. There you go. Just like that. So, all these military personnel moved into them. And then 1948, when the war ended, they all left. So it was, imagine, quite a shock. They knocked down all the quads and huts, which had the young men. Those just became slabs of concrete that existed all over Southwest Hondo, which is where I live, which became perfect for parking mobile homes, which is where I lived as a kid. My parents parked a mobile home in there when we moved into Hondo for a new job. And it was a very, very kind of depressed place after that, because you could see the remnants of a much bigger town, and now everybody was gone. And which has been replayed in hundreds of American cities across here, as most Americans have now moved into the place. And that must have changed the character of the people there, because I did find out that they were actually pretty nice people. They eventually changed the sign as "This is God's country, don't drive through it like hell" to "This is God's country, please don't drive through it like hell." They did change the sign and added that on there. However, I always remember it as kind of a staunchy place. I was from further south Texas, near the border, closer to the border, much more Hispanic community, a lot more lively, a lot more fun. Hondo was incredibly segregated town when we got there. All of the kind of white people lived on one side of railroad tracks. As you mix the sugar now into there and kind of blend that. Yeah, just keep going until you. Well, you can also do it other way around. Do it that. You can pour that. Oh, no, try and just put that in there and just kind of stir it up until you get enough sugar in there, okay? And just kind of do that. You're doing all right?
Fine.
All right, that's perfectly great, just like that. Yes, so the town was a pretty depressed place. We went there. There was an aircraft manufacturing place. It was left over by the Air Force. My father moved into the area, and that's how we ended up there. He was an inspector for Gary Aircraft, working on this town. Now, the thing about the town, though, it was a pretty conservative place. And my mother was trained as a hairdresser. That's what she eventually did.
Oh,
My mother,
now I-
that's correct. My mother started beauty school the first day I started first grade. So she drove me to first grade and then drove to beauty school. And so we started at exactly the same time. My mother was only, at that time, I was her fourth kid, so 24 years older than me. Okay, right? She's mixing the nuts, and you can follow the recipe. You can see what she's doing. There you go. That's good. Yeah, see, you did get it all in there. That's really great. And so when she went to beauty school, we went to Hondo. Of course, she was still a hairdresser. And there were two beauty shops in Hondo, Texas. There was, huh?
Apricots and dates.
Yes, we have them right here. And can you, yeah, so sorry about that. And you know how to just do with a paring knife and just really quick. And you need a cup of that. Here you go. Huh? Yeah. Or you could do it as my mother would have done it, which is kind of like this.
Well, I'm doing it my way.
You do it your way, because that's going to stop you from bleeding all over our food. So that's great. Good. You got that mix? Right. Good. So the next thing we're going to do is a very important part of the Texas cooking experience is you pour a little bit of each of that in each of those. And so she moved into the town. There was Cynthia Youngman's shop, which is only for white women in town who went there. And there was Inez's beauty shop on 20th Street, which is only for Hispanic women. My mother came into town, worked for Cynthia Youngman, who hired her because she was a white woman, worked there for a little while. My mother couldn't take the comments in the room and decided that what Hondo needed was a new beauty shop called Shirley's House of Beauty, in which there was going to be all kinds of people. My mother's first hairdresser she hired, other than herself, was a woman named Martha Garcia, who was a Spanish woman, scandalizing the town, and they created this place. But something was very interesting about Mom's beauty shop. When you walked in the door, which I tried to avoid, it was chaos. My mother had a margarita machine going. There was blenders going. There was all kinds of stuff. She would dye people's hair up in all different kinds of color. They would come in, half of them were half dressed, running around this beauty shop. It was total mayhem, right? And then all this kind of stuff. And they told some very, very dirty jokes. I shouldn't repeat it in them, but I'll say the only one I could say is, you know, the masochist says, "Beat me," and the sadist says, "No." That was it. I learned that from my mother. There we go. You put some there now. So it's really important as part of, you know, the morning cooking show.
Oh, gosh.
We have a little bit of tequila. There we go. Good. Yeah, it's really important to do that. Would you like one? No.
No, I'm driving.
How about you? You're driving?
Oh,
Very, very good thing.
There you go.
There we go. Now, it's an important part of the cooking. You know, my son says my problem with most adults is we have our blind spots. And he said it this way. I've learned all these things from kids. There we go. I learned all these kind of things from kids. And one of them, of course, is that he said, my truck, he says, "Dad, your truck has big blind spots." I said, "Correct." And he says, "You don't always see what's around you." Correct. And I said, "Correct." And he said, well, that's what, I'm here to do, is to help point out your blind spots. I thought that's really, really great. He does it about every 2 minutes. So there we go. Now, that aside, that's for dessert. Tequila is not just for breakfast anymore. You can have it all day long. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to put that cottage cheese in there. This recipe only has 3 ingredients. So these women would all get together into the beauty shop. And what was interesting about them is they would make all these recipes. And you could see tons and tons of pages of this stuff where women would write them on cards. There we go. So there are scores of these kind of little things written on everything they could possibly find, on scraps of paper. A lot of them were written on blank checks. Hondo National Bank, that was very aspirational of that little bank right there. That's the one that got robbed twice. And here's even a collection of the tamale pie recipes. So when Betty Crocker got started, they would actually ask for recipes from people from across the United States or send recipes for test kitchens. My grandmother, Elizabeth Phillips Smith, wrote one for tamale pie that made into one of the original Betty Crocker cookbooks, which is kind of interesting. My mother had a collection of that. I've never found the cookbook, but all kinds of things like that. Here's one from Victoria's, quite old. A cup of Tang, a cup of sugar, instant tea, lemonade, powder cloves. That's the tea I made back there, which you hope you will do that kind of stuff. No, there's a lot of rum in a lot of these, that's for sure. There's a picture of my family and my mother stuck in there. So that's me, if you want to know who this incredibly handsome young man is right there. There you go. Now, into that, there was interesting about that, about the cooking recipes from Texas, is this is called Mandarin, there we go, Mandarin orange salad. A lot of things were called salad that have absolutely nothing green in them, which is very interesting. Can you open this can and drain it into there? How are you doing? Okay, great, fantastic. But what's interesting about these cards, written on all kinds of stuff. There's recipes for pound cakes written on cattle truck company types things. There's things for all kinds of decadent, sweet type of things written on all kinds of whatever you could possibly find. They did hummingbird recipes, which are popular because of the huge hummingbird festival we have down in Texas and all this kind of stuff. So they had all of these kinds of recipes, and there's some things I've learned about this which are very, very interesting. Oh, I should have said drain that. There we go.
No, you said put it in.
Yeah. So you're okay. You're okay.
Okay.
This is why you don't cook, right? No,
Yeah.
this guy. Good. Stir. We can drain a little bit of that off, the juice off into there. Make sure you drain the mandarin oranges if you can. And you didn't have anything to drink yet, so that's pretty amazing. So the idea of providing recipes to other things is pretty American. Believe it or not, one of the first cookbooks in the United States was something called American Cookery. It was published, I was going to find the year, in 1796. Think about that. We were publishing cookbooks in the United States in 1796. Thank you, that's very good. And of course, the other thing we cook a lot with, apparently, in all these recipes were Jell-O. So you can add a box of Jell-O to that, the powder, and mix it, the whole box of Jell-O to that. And the other main ingredient seemed to be marshmallows. So marshmallows and Jell-O was important. And I've learned something very interesting about these recipes. The first thing about these recipes is, as opposed to the cookbook, which had a lot of things where you shifted flour and, with salt and added baking soda or baking powder and all this kind of stuff, there was none of that. And all of these recipes say, open a box of Jell-O, pour in something like Cool Whip, which is your next ingredient, fully made. This is for salad, by the way. So this is what they call salad. Put the Cool Whip in there as well with Jell-O. And so why do you think we went from multiple recipes calling for mixing flour and those kinds of stuff and eggs to these more instant things that like we're making here? Anyone want to think about that? Let's be archaeologists here for a second. You know, part of being an archaeologist is looking at what things are and thinking back. For example, we know that the guy who invented the doorbell did not own a dog, right? We can tell. So you can look back in time and say what it is that people had. So why do all of these recipes, almost none of them, say mix flour, baking powder, things like that? Take a shot at it. They wanted what? I'm talking about the things that the women wrote themselves. All of these cards, letters. Part of it is that we didn't have certain ingredients available. For example, if we had opened up a nice big cookbook and it said to get lobster, we would not have had lobster. And of course, that would not have been something to do. And we would substitute it, of course, with brisket, you know, or something like that, right? So part of that is, what do you have in your local area? If you lived in...
You could just open some packages, dump them in a bowl and stir it. That's a lot faster and more fun than measuring flour.
So why do you think that they would have found such a simple way of making foods?
Well, that's for people like me who don't cook.
These are probably women who went through cooking and home ec and things like that.
I think it's because they started working.
What changed for them?
They started working in
They
the
were what?
workforce.
They were working. One thing that may have changed is the desire to cook foods and present all of these kinds of recipes and putting things together, but they had gone to work. That could have been one thing that was changed, and they didn't have things. So first is just what, you're not going to walk into a market in South Texas and find creme fraiche, right? You're just not going to find that. You're not going to find certain ingredients. So they did use what they had and things that they would have instead, which is really important. Now, we all do that to a certain extent. Did your parents do that, right? They adapted to kind of things. Did your parents follow recipes? How many follow recipes or cook just off the hand? They followed recipes, you think? What did they do?
My mother was a great cook, but she never read a recipe. She made everything.
Yeah. So hold on. We gotta put that. Make sure we're using my. Yeah. Put that. Yeah. Everything.
My mother was actually a very good cook. And so she never followed a recipe.
Yeah.
But her mother taught her how to cook.
Right.
So everything was from everything that she learned from her mother.
Right.
And then she taught us to cook, and I can't cook.
Did you said your mom would use a cookbook occasionally? I saw it over here. What did your mom use with a cookbook?
The present that my mother gave me when I got married was the joy of cooking.
Oh, the joy of cooking.
Because
Right.
she was
Did you
was
cook
even-
from the joy of cooking?
not really, it was too complicated.
It was still too complicated. And that was one of the revolutionary type things of Betty Crocker's cookbook, is that it was the first cookbook in America that had large numbers of pictures in it to show you how to do things step by step. Everything was done through pictures. And so there was a time, which is interesting for these people, which is interesting because people knew how to cook. Why did they need in 1950s picture cookbooks once again? What had changed at the fact that these cookbooks would come out with photographs in there?
Maybe they didn't eat. If they were really rural, maybe they didn't go through school or whatever. And so pictures would supplement if you couldn't read.
Yeah.
And also cameras, I guess, and photography was becoming more prevalent.
Yeah, sorry, we got to make sure we get the microphone around. Sorry, Eric, I'm gonna have you kind of run over there. Other reasons why we think that they would have had all these kind of step-by-step things. What was changing in the culture
I
in
have,
1953? Were we becoming more informal or less informal?
hey, can we get a comment from Zoom from Rich Askins? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Okay, great.
Thank you. I think what changed is that there was more ready food supply and more transportation to other places after World War II. And in regards to my mother, she did use a cookbook once in a while, but she was from a German background, and somewhere she has accumulated a lot of German heavy cooking, potatoes, pasta, using sugar and things, just the way, she had learned.
Yeah. And in fact, if you look at the photographs though, from this cookbook, very good, Rich. A lot of the pictures look like this, if you've seen in cookbooks. What were they doing a lot in the 1950s? Formal entertaining, I think, more so than before, right? They were coming back from the war. They were all getting married. They were all young. They were all putting on parties, and everybody likes to do something a little bit nicer, perhaps. And so people were perhaps putting together something a little fancier. That could have been another reason why they would have done that. Anyone could think of other reasons? It does look more tantalizing, right? As Julia Child said, you could say it's so beautiful, you can tell someone's fingers have been all over it, right? Go ahead, Eric.
So I guess my question, or maybe my comment is maybe people were more mobile. And, you know, as people travel, you didn't have that opportunity to hand down a recipe from parent to child, you know, if they're farther away. So maybe this was a substitute. And I'm also going to say my dad was the cook in my family. And he considered himself quite the epicure. So he would subscribe to Gourmet magazine, and he'd read the New York Times recipe sections. And I have all these clippings of the same recipe, and he would take 4 different recipes and make his own special recipe. That's how he did. He was a little bit more systematic about it.
How many of your families subscribed to Popular Mechanics magazine? Did anyone do that? Oh, that must have been a very Southern thing, because every household in the South had a copy of Popular Mechanics next to the toilet. Yes, Jerry. Want to hand the microphone to Jerry? And while we're doing this, Jerry, 1 second, we're going to let you try this. So anyone who wants to try, this is called Mandarin salad. Once again, people in Texas called a lot of things salad that had nothing green in it. Anybody want to give me a response to that? That's great. But if you'd like to try this, 3 ingredients: Jell-O, Cool Whip, and but cottage cheese. So it is healthy from after that. So if you'd like to try some, raise your hand. We'll get that. And Jerry, your comments?
What was emerging is television and putting cooking shows on television. We became a very focused on vision and what we saw, and it did not have anything to do with literacy. It was just a kind of different way of learning that permeated the entire society in the 50s.
Yeah, it's for some reason in the 1950s, it seemed like a much more younger crowd in respect, right? Everybody's young, they're coming back from the war. They're building all these big giant tract homes in Long Island and New Jersey. They're putting all these houses in. People are moving into new neighborhoods. They maybe don't know the neighborhoods in ways that they would have done in the past. And they're putting on events, right? They're putting on little afternoon soirees and things like that for people to try stuff and trying to get to know one another. The cookbook, though, is far more complicated than the recipes that are in this recipes books, which are much, much easier types of things to make. And so what else can we say about the people who created these?
They like to eat.
Right. What's interesting about this is these things which are written on these cards, and I went through all of these cards in here, are things that when you normally went to a party, you did not find. These are things that women served mostly to each other. Now, why? Because I never saw these at parties. When you graduated high school in my hometown, you were expected to throw a party for the city. Our tradition is you open up the city, anyone can come in the door, and you host a party. And we have very, very common recipes that we do there. One of the most common foods, of course, is recipes for parisa, which is very common where I live. Parisa, of course, is raw hamburger meat with cheese, onions, and lemon juice, and salt and pepper and cumin. That's it. It's served without cooking. You serve the raw hamburger meat on crackers, saltine crackers, very Texas-y food. Yeah, Central Texas. Yes. Steak tartare, yes, is what it is. And because they're Alsatians, they're coming from France, they came over, they brought their recipes with it, and raw hamburger meat or raw sausage. Steak tartare is really what it is, as the types of things they're doing. So you threw a party, and the foods that we ate, the things we talked about were barbecue and maybe Mexican foods, enchiladas and tamales and things like that. But these recipes were off the hook, sweet, decadent, things like that. Why would they have done that in Shirley's House of Beauty? In a small town in Texas, you could have gone in the door at any time of the year. I could have walked in the door, heard all this dirty, loud music and all this stuff going on, and then there would have been some cookies or cakes or something being there served. Why would they do it? Greg, do you want to take a shot at it? Anyone else? Huh? So we're hearing from the crowd that it's inviting, it's welcoming. It certainly was that. My mother's beauty shop became the most busiest place, but she would dye their hair and have fun and all this kind of stuff and go out the door. And then she'd put their hair back in the usual big old bouffant hairstyles and they would go out the door into conservative Hondo. And so that beauty shop, I think, became a place literally for women to let their hair down in ways that they were not allowed to in other parts of culture. We see that in other cultures. For example, the black barber shop for a lot of men and women for like that. I gone to a Dominican beauty shop once. That was just like mom's shop. A lot of fun, those kind of stuff. But the neighbors probably would not have loved seeing that kind of reaction around town as much as they possibly did. And so those were kind of little places where people came and hid out and did their fun in small town. Yes, she did. The mayor of town, the mayor's wife, my mother asked her to leave the beauty shop once because the mayor's wife said something racist. And so mom asked her to go. They were long-term friends. My mother kicked her out of the beauty shop. That was the mayor's wife. You can imagine that was a very, very difficult thing. Luckily, my mother and her reconciled, and that involved me and my brothers and some friends of ours getting a marching band and marching down the street, playing the opposite music to the college she went to. So we did that kind of crazy thing. So we made amends. Yes, Diana, over here. Go bring me the mic. How is it?
I just wanted to say that these recipes really are foolproof. The measurement is already done for you, and the flavoring is already there. And they're really, they must be very consistent. You're either going to add a package of Jell-O or you're going to misread the directions. You
Yep.
don't have to make any real decisions.
Yep.
So they can be done really fast, but they're also very reliable, which is not so much the case when you make brownies from scratch. I know my brownies, one pan never turns out the same as the next pan, and I never know why. But they don't seem to be affected by humidity or.
Do you use the box or do you use?
No, I
You
always
blend together.
I cook almost everything from scratch.
In
And
fact, how many of you bring treats here for our Sunday gathering and things like that? How many of you actually make those from scratch? Yeah, you want to say something about that? Why you make it from scratch yourself? Go ahead and use the mic. Right here we go, right behind you.
I mean, obviously, you know, I come from an Italian-American family. My grandfather immigrated here from Italy. He had a huge garden. So everything was farm to table. Back then, it wasn't called farm to table,
Yep.
but my parents never opened a can. You just, pick the tomatoes and you just eat fresh. So
Yep.
that was, I think, part of the culture also.
Lisa asked me to look at her basement to make sure there was no water getting with this massive flood while they were in New Hampshire. And then she walked in the door today thanking me with a jar of pesto. That was very much what people did, right? Thank you so much. This is something I made. And how wonderful that is for me. Like that you went last night, you made this thing and presented it as a gift. And that's what a lot of these things that the women were doing to each other as well, that they would not have done outside of the door. Like I said, I went to a lot of other big family garden stuff. It was pinto beans and brisket. It was mashed potatoes. It was all the usual things that you'd expect. But in the beauty shops, they provided each other these sweet, delicate, highly sweetened foods, as far as I'm concerned. A lot of Jell-O, a lot of instant. And it says something about the culture of the women in that, but that they could only feel like they could do it really in that place, which is interesting about the town. Well, Jerry has a comment over here. And then we'll see if we have any comments online. You're zooming in too close on me, Aaron. Look.
There is also the factor of a sense of hospitality with food. Now, I come from both a Jewish and Italian background. The other thing is the rise in pets that affected it. In our household, if you had tested a new recipe, you gave it to the dog, and if the dog didn't get sick, you ate it.
I'm not sure we would have done that in South Texas, but that's an interesting theory right there. But archaeologically speaking, so I have these two things. I have this very much mainstay American cookery type of books, and it does have a lot of cookies and cakes and things like that. But it is all from scratch. There's not, go find a box of Jell-O. If you look in the apricot pound cake, which I made for you this morning, so we're going to bring out some apricot pound cake in a second. There would have been things like, white cake mix, Wesson oil, lemon Jell-O, right? And so part of that is that what people that had in their house and what they had to serve and those kind of stuff. But these things, and by the way, I also made the Monica's jalapeno pie, which you're going to try, some of you as well. We're making yum yum Christmas balls. How's that going? Great. We got almost enough to serve people. We have percolator punch right there. And we have pistachio palette. The other thing I found in South Texas, we cook a lot with pineapple. There are a lot of pineapple recipes. We're from a place where you can get pineapple, right? Pineapple grows in the south part of the valley. We would have found that in our things. How many of you had fresh pineapple up here in the north? Was it common? Could you find it in grocery stores when you were kids? No. Where we would have walked into a grocery store and there would have been pineapple sitting there, of course, type of stuff. And Cool Whip was interesting. But pistachio pudding, probably the reason why they use pistachio pudding is that, pistachio flavorings and those kinds of stuff would have been impossible to find in many towns in America of 2,000, 3,000 people to this day, right? You're not going to find those things. So they found what they could. They adapted the recipes perhaps from their parents, made them fast because they were working, took them into mom's place, which was this wild party where they could literally let themselves be down and bend social customs by being with people of other races and doing all this kind of ethnic groups, being in these kind of places together, but then still walk out the door with the appearance of being a typical kind of Hondo person of that day, which is really, really interesting. And so they were trying, I think, the way they could. The phenomenon of recipes is something I think we miss in America. That's simple. Here's how you do it. We had a young man here speak, Paolo, really great, got his PhD, super smart, talking about artificial intelligence. There's so much in our life that seems to be surpassing us. I think that's always been the truth at all generations. And simple step-by-step with pictures and things like that were ways of making it feel more comfortable, which we sometimes forget about in this country of how can we make this so simple that it's almost formulaic, especially in our complex kind of society. Did you try that? Was it okay? All right, we could pass some around. Do you want to try some? If you'd like to, we're going to pass around the Yum Yum Christmas balls that go there. And I want to say one other thing about that experience of living in small towns that's different from here. Did you try one?
No, not yet.
Oh, you always serve the cooks first. What the heck?
Sorry.
The cooks are supposed to get one first. What the hell?
Curt,
Yes.
this is Joelle. This is Joelle. Can I say something?
Please do.
Okay, let me turn my camera back on. So, I want to say my grandmother made these recipes, a lot of the sweets especially, and I think that there was a factor of trauma because she was born in the 30s.
Yep.
And there was scarcity. And so then she also had a hard life. Like you said, a lot of people, she dropped out of school in 8th grade, all this stuff. And so this was a way of comfort from just a difficult life. And so kind of like, this is something good for myself that we can have this nice dessert or whatever. And I think that also was part of it for a lot of people. Like she was actually a hoarder from growing up in the Depression. And so, yeah, like I just, even back further, I think those dynamics of being born early, like in the 30s or whatever, and then being an adult in the 50s, you were still carrying those old things with you, I believe, so.
Yeah, in fact, Joelle, that's a very good point about people coming back after the war. World War II. You got to remember who they were cooking for. There was a lot of social trauma. There was a lot of very tight social mores that were going on. There were all these things that were bubbling on the surface. Racism was rampant. Institutionalized racism kept people divided. All of these things were going on. And we have this kind of phenomenon, this cultural tradition with humans of providing recipes for one another and sharing bits of wisdom on cards around to make people kind of happy and welcome and those kinds of stuff. And sometimes with fresh new ingredients. Some of these ingredients are fairly surprising in a way, but usually it's what they could find, which is another interesting point about small town America and openness. So they're trying to figure out, of course, why we get so politically divided. What is it that makes us fall into different camps? And one of the thoughts is that the more you are exposed to other cultures and or their ideas, the more open you are. And the more open you are, the more progressive, by the way, you tend to vote, which is an interesting connection, right? That exposure. People in dense urban cities in the Northeast and out in California with lots of blending of cultures and people and things that are happening are exposed to all these ideas, which confront and challenge our ways of knowing about the world. That's not the same thing that's going on in most small towns America, where you don't have that much blending except on TV. And people being shocked by what they see on TV and being confronted by it in ways that we're not. And I knew that experience from being in South Texas. I knew what that felt like, to feel like something was happening and changing and was coming to attack our culture and we couldn't stop it. But it's not the same thing you would have had even here in Teaneck, which was even a blended community pretty early on, right? One of the first segregated communities in New Jersey, wasn't it? And what? First community to voluntary integrate schools, he said, right?
Voted.
Yeah, and they voted. And so, yeah, they went voluntarily. And it was that kind of experience, which was not true of many places otherwise.
Probably because it was a destination point for a lot of
Yeah.
Reform Jewish people leaving New York.
Yeah, try that again.
Teaneck took that position, unlike most other towns in Bergen County, because Jewish folks moving out to the suburbs from the west side of New York City came to Teaneck and had already changed the politics of the town in the decade before that vote took place.
So those Upper West Side lefties left the Upper West Side and moved out here also, which had a big influence.
Richfield Park, Pagoda.
Yeah.
Not so much.
In fact, I heard that Leonia has an interesting history, is where a lot of the early scientists lived, you know, that a lot of them moved to Leonia and there was quite the beatnik community there. Does anyone remember that or know the story about that? Alan Alder
lived there.
Peter?
Did I see a hand? Go ahead, Peter.
That's what I've heard when I worked in New England, Englewood Cliffs. People came from Leonia with a scientist background. So that's what I've heard. Funny enough, what you're saying. So that's what I heard. I just wanted to make one more comment with regard to cooking. I learned cooking from my mother, where on Friday evening, my mother and I, who came from her grandmother came from a catering family. My mother was a chemist. I'm a chemist as well. So you might think we work from a recipe. No, we cook from scratch. I never look in a recipe, although I'm a chemist. Sounds a bit strange. But on Friday night, we always cook together for the dinners from the following week together with my mom. So on Friday evening, we would stand in the kitchen and make all kind of dinners and talk about all kind of things. That's where I learned cooking.
Fantastic, Peter. Yeah.
I want to give Terry on Zoom a chance to make a comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
Please do.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Like Lisa, my mother was Italian, and most of the time she cooked not from recipes. But once in a while she would pull out the cookbook, and I think there was some element in that she wanted to be American. That would be a point of pride for her to have a normal American family. and not be an immigrant. So there was some of that.
I think that is, yeah, that's a very interesting point about a recipe as an entree into social customs and social traditions. And if you don't know those recipes, I mean, before, did you try to cook more American with your families if you had a very immigrant family, or did they know they just cooked the food? Like, was it always good, rich, beautiful Italian cooking because you were in an Italian neighborhood? Would you have done that, or would she try to cook middle of the road?
Yeah, middle of the road. I mean, my mother was second generation. She didn't immigrate here. So she was, so she grew up as an American.
Yeah.
But yeah, lasagna was a staple. Of course, there's always sauce in the freezer. So you have a ready meal when anybody comes. But roast beef, pork chops, just American hamburgers, hot dogs. Yeah, we had those kinds of things too.
Thank you. I'll come over to Athena.
Me being the immigrant, I remember distinctly that I needed the recipe for Thanksgiving stuff because we wanted to do American stuff because all the other kids got American type stuff Thanksgiving. So, but I've never liked turkey.
You never liked turkey. Yeah.
Pam, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about another aspect of Betty Crocker and cooking. Remember, it was the woman's job to take care of the food and the sweets and everything in the house, because the men would go out and work and mom would stay home and cook and bake. And so what better way of promoting bacon was through a woman promoting baking,
Yeah.
like Betty Crocker.
Right, Betty Crocker, you're right. And so it's an interesting phenomenon. Like I said, the woman who played her on television, when it eventually became a television thing, did not know how to cook herself. She was not a cooker. In fact, it's very interesting. In 1948, they did a survey and they had a bunch of women figures up there to see who women recognized. Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, was first. Betty Crocker was second, which is interesting because she wasn't a real woman and she was played by an actress, correct? In a way, it was a character type of thing. And I think it's emblematic sometimes of the role that the women were playing that day was they were not yet themselves, unless you were Eleanor Roosevelt, maybe. You didn't have that kind of opportunity to be out there. But I think the one thing we're kind of missing in America today is something as formulaic as a cookbook. And I'm not saying that we need to come back to this by any stretch of the imagination, but think about what this is, that way of, hey, this is a way that we can celebrate where we're connected. It is somewhat formulaic. It's something easy because so much in our life has gotten more complicated. And it's just so much easier to think about doing that. Before my mother passed, she said, what do you want? She said, there's the whole house, take whatever you want. And I said, I want two things. I want your bird book. She had signed by Jane Goodall of the Gorilla in the Mist. So I have it upstairs, the bird book with Jane Goodall's signature, and this cookbook. And I think it was because I always remember, I loved the fact that it had all these secret recipes and things like that. It had all of this kind of information. And I just recently, when I opened this book, found something she wrote and stuck into the inside of the page. I didn't see this when my mother gave it to me. She says, this cookbook is given to my son, Curt, who not only enjoys cooking, but also appreciates the history of the book, given to me by my mother as a wedding gift when me and his dad married. I was 16 years old, Dad was 21. I know you will treasure it and will look to try new meals and recipes. Quite a nice thing. She put an inscription in there to me. There's lots in here I'm still hoping to cash in on, including the Betty Crocker coupons, of which there are many. I'm still trying to get some cutlery set for that. We'll see how we're doing. But it is kind of nice to have those traditions, to think about those kinds of ways that we can connect with other people. To a certain extent, America's kind of losing that a little bit, and we do need to reclaim that. We need to find things we can all get around, and food tends to be a good one, in which we can connect, we can celebrate, we can find, and maybe even stick in a few ingredients that are something new and challenge established customs in our own country as well. Thank you so much. And thank you to Diane, who's busy doing all this stuff. And Marinka, thank you so much. Appreciate that. And I'll turn this over to Eric. Thank you so much. You may remove your hair if you like. Or...
Yes, thank you.
Why do women wear wigs? They're so hot. Oh my God. Go ahead.
I will.
Wash your hands.
Thank you so much. Curt, thank you so much. This was really wonderful and, and delicious as well. Just a lot of fun and a little bit different from sometimes what we maybe do here at the Society, but just a lovely change. And thank everyone here who's in the room and also everyone on Zoom who participated, who shared.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.